The opportunity to put my father's ashes fully to rest presented itself last winter during a freak ice storm when my ex's mother passed away in Bangkok, Thailand. This was the woman who could not have been more of a mother to me than if she had incubated me within her warm womb, nursed and nurtured me within the folds of her ample bosom. My ex sent me a message, simply saying that her respiratory illness had taken her within a matter of weeks, and that he was having her remains cremated and placed in the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. Without only mild hesitation due to financial constraints, I told him that we would be there in a few days. My son and I took off once more to say goodbye to the woman we last met 6 months prior, giving warm parting hugs outside the train station in Paris. We were not to know that that embrace would be our last. I hurt for my ex and could relate in a way. His wife was finishing the last of her medical studies and needed to tend to their 1-year-old. He was on his own to inhume his mother, the only parent he had ever known. My heart went out to him. I knew what it was to be alone and disoriented with nothing and no one to lead you home but a trail of tears, grief, and ashes. I was putting on my hero cape of sorts, determined to save him and whatever of my soul was left in need of exoneration from my own past and the ashes thereof. This occasion I saw as a veritable vehicle for ultimate healing. I anticipated them being the release of all the psychosocial distress related to the human condition. To me, nothing else could reconcile the loss of the passing of this aforementioned Goodman. This heavy compulsion toward any integration was, in hindsight, my feeble attempts to merge my indiscretions with that of ultimate sanctification in the discarding of my father's remains. I was bereft of any material worries regarding financial or time restrictions or constraints, as I was going to support the relationships of some of the most cherished members of my family. To me, this is what makes debt worth it. The burden of future pecuniary stress was assessed and dismissed as a future eventuality regardless. Life will give you a rainy day, whether one is prepared for it or not. Not to mention that rainy days are relative to the amount of preparedness of the individual. I have encountered many others with the level of security to produce an umbrella for events far less inclement, but I wager just as justifiable in their relative importance. So my son and I were once again going to storm the globe in search of adventure, learn about ourselves and our place in the world. And Dad was going to have an ash marriage, his ashes merging with those of a woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own had in many ways. Never having met in real life, they would now do so, uniting posthumously. Therefore, when news of my ex-mother's death came in on a Thursday and concluded with me telling him that I would see him in just a few days, we set out for San Francisco to get an urgent passport renewal, not expecting to travel so soon after my ex's wedding, and my son and I were on a plane with stiff new valid passports in hand just 4 days later. I honestly do not remember packing. Don't know how I was able to book a passport appointment the day before the flight, or manage to find a dog and cat sitter for nearly 2.5 months in that short amount of time. It was just one of many divinely guided occurrences that were to come, although the death of my ex-mother came as a shock that had happened in Thailand, had not. She had spent half the year there every year since my ex was 15, trusting him to raise himself during some of the most formative years of his life. Despite how this seems, she was a natural nurturer with a kind, generous, gentle, and loving nature. For the most part, a formidable figure despite her diminutive, dwarfish size, she had a wide, abiding form, and her laughing eyes could just as easily sport a stormy, stern glare when displeased. Her short arms flailed with emphasis at any of our peccadillos, and were punctuated at the wrists by the sharp jingle of silver and gold bangles. For decades, she made the vibrant streets and serene landscapes of Thailand a significant part of her life. It was her preferred home. It was where she found solace, where she retreated to during the cold months of winter, and where she seemed most at peace. Thailand had become more her home than any other place. The fact that she and I had discussed at length my visiting her there during the wedding felt poignant. The discussion of a visit held burdensome weight, much like the ashes of my father had at times, the burden of promises unfulfilled and interpersonal failures. Throughout the years, I had often promised to visit her in Thailand. Each time, life's inevitable hurdles stood in the way. Finances were always a constant barrier, an ever erecting wall between my intentions and my reality. Paradoxically, given the expenses accrued during my ex's wedding only 6 months earlier, I felt it simply an extension of that promise to them, my surrogate family, to show up as both best man and designated daughter, just now at a funeral. I owed us all that adventure. It was a necessity. The last of Dad's ashes were still burning for a proper burial, and with them, all fractured parts of my own self that I was now bravely offering in immolation to the departed. Knowing how many of my past selves were burned and buried alongside Dad, I knew that this trip signified a big aspect of self also needing to be cleansed and buried, even if I did not know exactly what it was, hiding as it was in a blind spot at the time. I knew that the universe, along with my ancestors, spirit guides, angels, and aliens, had made at least this path clear to me and were accompanying me on this mission to the end. Bangkok was a perfect place to land. It was a relief with everything both foreign and yet familiar at the same time. For instance, there is no shortage of McDonald's, Burger Kings, and 7-Elevens. It boasts a well-connected infrastructure, architecturally and technologically. Everyone has a smartphone, and there were no dead spots that I could find. With preconceived notions of endless rice fields and floating houseboats rowed by giant bamboo reeds for oars, I thought that I would somehow be going back in time. The contrary occurred. I was not only catapulted into a similar culture, I arrived someplace in the future as well, I felt. The old architecture looks new again, surrounded as it is by examples of peak modernism. Skyscraper buildings bedecked with giant TV screen billboards, showcasing the latest in fashion and technology. Its undeniable currentness and relevance is almost ostentatious in its demand for acknowledgement. If I had been less jet lagged, or less preoccupied with orienting myself to the abruptness of the decision I made to travel, I might have been more overwhelmed by the majesty of it all. As it turns out, I can only now, in hindsight, make sense of the situation in all its complexity. The funeral, the day after our arrival, was joyous despite my exhaustion. I was happy to see my ex, especially now knowing that with his mother departed, there would be fewer and fewer occasions for us to get together, being so far removed in each other's life in circumstance and location. I knew that I was letting go of him as well, and the tight cord tied to the ways in which we had loved and supported each other throughout our lives. Once like husband and wife, then like brother and sister, we were both now orphans. In Bangkok, we took a local Rua Hang Yao boat out onto the river at sunset, accompanied by another friend of his mother's who had been able to make the trip. My ex and I took turns with our respective ashes, not exchanging many words. I envisioned an epic Viking funeral full of reverie, pomp, and circumstance. It was a lovely affair, but felt more like parallel play. We each had our own way of honoring our ashes. His mother's ashes were wrapped in a thin gauze blanket, which he dipped into the water, allowing the ashes to fully submerge beneath the surface before pulling the fabric back aboard. I grabbed a bit of what was left of Dad out of my plastic sandwich bag and tossed them liberally and lugubriously, ensuring that they would not return to our faces, but still with the secret hope that they would be carried far and perhaps end up in someone's food, allowing for his spirit to live on through them, imbued during digestion, much like I had done at least twice before as spirit compelled me. We made our return trip to the shore to finish the evening with a few beers and some local street food before we all parted ways for the foreseeable future. My ex returned to Italy the next morning. Although we had only about 8 hours in each other's presence, I suddenly felt so strangely disoriented and alone. I did very little prior research. I honestly had no thought other than to marry the ashes and be someone's support system in their time of need. I regrouped emotionally and began to move intuitively, instinctively even, it seemed. The mission grew organically as we moved. We made the route by walking it, guided by an unseen hand. Unlike so many times before, unpreparedness was not due to personal procrastination, irresponsibility, or lack of care or concern. There had simply been no time. News of her death and our transition into travel had all happened too fast. We gave ourselves over to fate and to the will of the gods. We were steered by serendipity and felt divinely protected. We made the most of our month in Thailand, heading south to a few islands, going to a full moon ceremony, and learning new and better ways of being and doing in another part of the world. We were making insta friends, people that seemed divinely placed on our path to steer us toward even more magic and deeper healing. These individuals seemed to appear out of the woodwork to lend validity and support to our mission, offering good conversation, good company, and camaraderie. It was life giving, despite the somberness of the situation. As our time unfolded, I resigned myself to reworking another place in that part of the world. Bali, where I met my ex husband, was an indispensable detour. I wanted to take my son to the place his father and I had met, and let him put some of Dad's ashes in the very spot that I did so many years before on the eve of meeting his father. I was finding it hard to move past all of my prior relationship failures, including the one with my own father. I was looking forward to the prospect of healthy love and partnership again, perhaps something lasting this time. In fact, I had taken a chance and extended an invite, entirely too prematurely, to someone I had met back in our new town. Someone whose very soul seemed to mirror mine, I believed. A satellite being and part of the new community and friend group that my son and I were encountering on occasion. Casually at first, and then with more and more regularity, we came to rely on these friends to help initiate us into the city and its customs. This particular person felt, to me, not just familiar, but as if past, present, and potential future collapsed into a singularity. The gravitational pull was so strong that even my son offhandedly promoted him from friend to being his choice of new dad. The absurdity of it all was that I was not only approving of the idea, but for the first time since my divorce from my ex husband, I was excited. Places in my heart and body that I thought were long dead began stirring and yearning. I did not begin planning any wedding, but I did indulge myself in fantasizing about intimacy in all respects. He had catalyzed and quickened my convalescence and recovery from unhealed traumas, psychosexual, etc. I felt that I owed it to myself, and perhaps to him, to bury those traumas at the very spot where I had met my previous perpetrator, crystallizing that healing with my son in audience to my ritual release of Dad, and with him the psychopathic proxy whose influence over my life had become a persistent monkey on my back. With this metaphorical burial, I would be free to begin again, resurrected in a new place with a new sense of purpose and being. I had seen the suggestive wink of possibility, not just reflected in the blue eyed face of my potential future, but also in my new Pacific Northwest city. I felt they were both waiting for my whole self to return bagless and unburdened. In fact, it seemed that everyone we met on our journey seemed to rally in support of our healing. It felt as if the whole world knew and was helping usher us toward our goal of recovery, regeneration, and revival. I was at least trying my best to burn and scatter that last of my ashes, lest the ancestors have died in vain. All ancestors. Dad's most assuredly. I recognized that, with my broad swath of ancestorship, I was afforded the permission to call to council and court all ancestors to participate in my pursuit of a higher purpose. Not many have fully understood my journey, or that there was only one way that it could be done. This way, the way that it has unfolded to date. I was devoted to my long and exhaustive pilgrimage back to myself, my best self. I would not be the only person in history whose feet walked long roads to personal freedom, out of suffering and into salvation, or if not salvation, then toward some form of enlightenment. I walk the streets back here in my new neighborhood with a similar fidelity. I spent so much of my life searching for my home, and had now settled in a city whose hurting mirrored my past selves in many profound ways. In looking into the eyes of the unsheltered, unfed, and unhealed, I feel that I am at a crossroads. I could allow myself the peace of rebirth in this city than a seeming post apocalyptic decay, or I could continue to burn and scatter, becoming once again the ashes that I worked so hard to release. The city, like life, is full of possibilities and what ifs. I respect that a city has chosen to martyr itself to all of society's ills for the sake of the greater good. I hope the accuracy and irony of that statement is appreciated and taken into consideration as my fate unfolds in this city and on these pages. It isn't the city's fault that outside perceptions fail to reflect its goals, interest, and intent on creating a greater and freer future for all. It is high time we prove the power of radical progressive change. I myself am a change maker of sorts. I have been to some irrevocable places to retrieve myself. I do not regret any of my life decisions, although there are a few that I would definitely not do again, as they would not be worth the rework. For the moment, I believe in weaving a tight tapestry. I am showing my son how to be relentlessly in growth and in the pursuit of something honorable, noble even. He is learning, like me, how to braid the fabric of his own life and persevere above all else almost as an act of defiance. The fact that I exist is testament to my fortitude in the face of failure. My existence is my resistance. Resistance to what does not serve, support, or align with my highest good and highest version of self, even if that manifests in the form of people, places, or things. Resistance to popular opinion of how a black woman should think, behave, or even be. These days, my resistance looks quite contrary to its meaning. My defiance is in my lack of forced compliance, nor will I coax, compel, nor coerce any desired circumstance to occur. I am releasing expectations of an anticipated outcome. To that end, I do not know what happened to that blue eyed stranger, as I have not seen him, nor the other members of that friend group, since arriving back from Southeast Asia. It is of no importance at the moment. I reckon the end justifies the means, and I find myself flowing toward some place of pure integration, regardless of there being some sort of Prince Charming to rescue me from my ivory tower of celibacy and solitude. I am content for the moment to get to know myself free from needing someone to band aid any past hurt, especially ones they were not the cause of. A catalyst for growth and healing was obviously necessary, and as much as my son and I had desired our little fantasy family with the blue eyed face of my future, that future does not have to be now, or even in this lifetime. Perhaps his resonance with us was even from a past life lived in love and laughter. Maybe it was a shared delusion, or a moment of collective psychosis between mother and child. Who knows? What I do know is that meeting him made me want to become a better person, to refine my rougher edges and to heal past survival mode, and toward an optimally actualized version of self and satisfaction. I did not want to settle for anything less than my best self. Unlike my ex husband, who in hindsight provided and promoted an escape from the pain of my father's death, this boy seemed to invite me to lean into the pain for the purposes of healing, really and truly healing, thoroughly. I say boy because meeting him made me almost forget that I had been hurt before. It was a puppy love that regressed me back to high school, if not before. In his presence, I felt an odd sort of energy, an attraction so intense that it was nauseating, embarrassing even. I felt that he could tell I was ready to jump out of my skin and into his. So eager was I to see if my suspicions were correct, and we were indeed the same, just suited differently. He laughed at even my most obscure jokes and references, and our constant eye contact was already having more intimate, nonverbal conversations. I found myself singing outdated love songs, and the nights we were to all gather. I romanticized ridiculously. My getting ready routine was long and thorough, complete with soundtrack, meticulous grooming, and dangerously overthought outfits, only to show up nonchalantly casual and seeming altogether unconcerned, belying the painstaking procedure. I needed that trip to Southeast Asia, if for no other reason than to honor those newly awakened feelings with the burial of my ex husband. That the boy in question has long since disappeared from our lives matters not. I do not know who will be the beneficiary of those long dormant feelings now reawakened. For the moment at least, I accept divine timing and invite the universe to co create with me for my highest good. For too long, I have lived on the same errant winds as my father's ashes and the ashes of failed relationships and ways of being even before then. At last, or at least for the moment, I have risen out of those particular ashes with no desire to burn or be burned once more in matters of life or love. I am not overly cautious or fearful, I feel. I just find that at present, I need rest for my transformation to be complete. Although I am still in a form of dormancy, a chrysalis or an incubating egg of sorts, I know that I must take the chance before too long to rise out of even the ashes of reflection, lest they turn into stagnation. I must claim the battle as won and allow my healed self to soar like a fiery bird ever higher in pursuit of a more permanent place to perch, a place of peace and purpose.